Hello everyone. Let us understand the various terms which we are going to use in our upcoming videos so that we can understand them in a better way. We know that the transfer of characteristics from parents to the offspring or progeny is done by the genes which controls the specific characteristics or traits in an organism. Let's take this plant. We know that the parent plant is going to transfer its characteristic to the offspring or the progeny. The genes work in pair and we represent them by letters. The genes controlling same characteristics are given same letters. For example, in case of plants, if we talk about the height of the plant, the genes controlling the characteristic tallness is represented by capital T and the genes responsible for dwarfism is represented by small t. The letters capital T and small t are actually two forms of same gene which represents or which controls the height of the plant and are alternative to each other. Now the genes controlling the same characteristics are of two types, the dominant and the recessive. The genes which decides the appearance of an organism even in the presence of the alternative gene is called as dominant gene, and the gene which decides the appearance of an organism only in the presence of another identical gene is called as recessive gene. We represent dominant gene by capital letter and the recessive gene by small letter. And for plants, tallness is dominant trait and dwarfism is recessive trait. Let us see the genes present in these two plants. We know that genes work in pairs. From the definition of recessive traits, we know that this dwarf plant will have both the recessive genes and hence we can say that the genes present here will be both small t. So we can write it as small t, small t. Now if we look at this tall plant, we know that it has one dominant gene for sure as tallness is dominant trait and it is represented by capital T. So it will either have one capital T and a small t or both capital T and capital T. This description of genes representing a characteristic or trait is called as genotype. For these two plants, the genotype of tall plant can be capital T or a capital T and a small t. For dwarf plant, we know that it will be two small t's, small t and a small t. The characteristic or trait which is visible in an organism is called as phenotype. For these two plants, being tall and being dwarf are phenotypes because these traits are visible to us. So in simpler terms, we can say that phenotype of an organism is its physical characteristics which are determined by the genotype. For example, the genotype capital T or capital T and small t resulted in phenotype tallness and the genotype small t resulted in the phenotype dwarfness. Now when the parents breed or cross to produce the offspring or the progeny, then the first progeny is called as first filial generation or the F1 generation. When the first generation progeny crosses or breeds among themselves, they produce the second progeny which is called as the second filial generation or the F2 generation. You can understand it in simpler words like mother and father are the parental generation, children are the first filial generation or the F1 generation and the grandchildren are the second filial generation or the F2 generation. So, I suppose now you have understood the various terms which we have studied like progeny, dominant gene, recessive genes, genotype, phenotype, F1 generation and F2 generation. We are going to use these terms while studying the Mendel's experiment and all the other topics in this chapter. We are going to study Mendel's experiment in our next video.